Research that resonates.
Schweizer has not been wrong on any of his years and years of reporting on the Bidens.
Investigations that matter.
If your last name wasn't Biden, do you think you would have been asked to be on the board of 𝑏𝒂?
I don't know. Probably not. But that's, I don't think that there's a lot of things that would have happened in my life that if my last name wasn't Biden.
The only entities, the only people that would report on this, and Peter Schweizer, who deserves a Medal of Freedom, in my view.
This is The Drill Down with Peter Schweizer.
Hi, this is Peter Schweizer, and welcome to The Drill Down, where we relentlessly expose cronyism, corruption, and the abuse of power in Washington, D.C. The co-host of the program, Eric Eggers. Eric, how are you?
I'm excellent, Peter. It's election season. It's always fun when you have a chance to kind of take the temperature of the country and see not just the temperature of the country, but it's also kind of a little bit of a democracy test. We're going to see how well each state does in administering their portion of our elections.
Yeah, you may not be able to talk about the election around the dinner table, depending on the political composition of your family members, but we're going to talk today not about things you can't control, meaning the issues swirling around and what candidates are saying and what they're not doing. We want to talk about the electoral process itself, because at the end of the day, it's what the votes say, not what the polls say, and not what the candidates say, and certainly not what the national media is saying. So we want to talk about election risks, and some of these I think are going to be surprising to people, the things that they should be watching for and should be concerned about. And this is based on a report that we've been working on here, the Government Accountability Institute, that will be coming out.
Yeah, I think it is out now. In fact, you can check out the report at thedrilldown.com. We put a lot of work into this. I would say it's the second best thing I've read that puts together a systematic review of the threats facing our election, behind, of course, my book that came out 6 years ago and basically predicted everything that was going to happen. No, it didn't really predict it, because who saw COVID happening? But it did say, hey, here's the least secure ways to vote. And then 2020 came out and we said, okay, here's how we're going to vote that way.
I have a feeling the Democrats read your book and used it as a manual in 2020 to help win that election.
I would love to say that that's possible, but based on the sales figures, no one read my book, so it's fine.
Well,
I'm stuck here with you.
So let's talk about some of the issues, right? I mean, when people think about election integrity, of course, there were all these reports about ballots and about machines being hacked, and there was never any evidence, to my mind, that was presented about the hacking or the Venezuelans and all that. But there's some very specific things that are troubling. And one of them, the first one you have listed here, is poll workers.
Yeah.
Poll workers. And this sort of harkens back to the day when, we think everything now is done online and by computer. But the fact is, you need poll workers there to help at the polls, to make sure people are voting, and also make sure that things are being done right. What is the problem with the poll workers?
Well, think of it this way, Peter Schweizer. It's funny to think, who do you think is available for what's essentially a seasonal job? I mean, you have people who are in charge of the election centers, but then to staff up, they're hiring people not on a full-time basis. There are full-time employees.
These are paid.
Yeah, there are
people,
both paid and and volunteer positions. Right. But when you do go out and hire people to work because you staff up, I mean, think of they're like, I'm not saying they're like Santa malls, but I'm saying, mall Santas. But I mean, in some ways, they are gifts to Democrats, these people that get hired to work. And that's actually what the lawsuits are about. Now, we have this phrase in politics, follow the money. When you want to look at election integrity, follow the lawsuits.
Right.
And that's what tells us.
And dig into them and make sure they're not absurd. And these seem to be pretty telling.
So the city of Atlanta, 3 cities are having some challenges in terms of just like hiring people in kind of an equitable way, which is ironic because Democrats, what do we hear all the time about Democrats?
Equity.
We love us some equity, and we love us some diversity.
Yeah, and they want representation.
Absolutely, but just not when it comes to hiring people from an ideological diversity standpoint to work these elections. So that's one of the things that people are suing. They're suing the director of Fulton County's Department of Registration and Elections. Her name is Nadine Williams. She's being sued because only 9 of 45 what they're calling qualified Republican poll workers have actually been hired to do the work. And out of 62 qualified Republican poll workers that they suggested, only 6 of them were hired to work on Election Day. So they're having a hard time, with the ratios and the staffing. If they're only hiring, 9 out of 45 and 6 out of 62, that's one of the things the Republican Party in Atlanta has a little hard time with.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this is the lawsuits are occurring in large metropolitan areas in states that are swing states that could decide the election. So Atlanta, Georgia, you talked about. You look at the numbers of Democrats that have been hired to work at the polls versus the number of Republicans. It's pretty eye-popping. You move to Detroit. Each city board of elections commissioners must appoint an equal or near equal as possible number of election inspectors from each major political party. In this case, the Republican Party claims that of the 300 Wayne County's 335 election precincts failed to reach this equal number of Republicans and Democrats with inspectors in 2024, with 202 of the non-compliant precincts included no Republican election inspectors at all.
Hey, there's no such thing as a Republican ballot, a Democratic ballot. It's just a ballot that needs to be counted.
Yeah, just the head count. The plaintiffs, which is of course the Republican Party, allege that in Detroit they hired 310 Republican election inspectors.
Now hang on, that's a lot. 310. That's like Atlanta can't even get close to that. So
yeah,
310.
except they also hired 2,337 Democrats. So it's almost, not quite, a 10-to-1 ratio of Democrats. These are the people that are making sure that the ballot processing is being done correctly. It seems to me that would be a major issue. And again, these are the sorts of things that lead to concerns and suspicions about what's going on in these big cities, because, of course, there's a long history in the United States of major cities, political machines stuffing ballot boxes. They certainly have done it in Chicago over the years. They've done it in Philadelphia. We know they've done it in Detroit as well. And this is a problem.
We'll get to Chicago, and by the way, that's what's kind of is the really weird thing about how this conversation about election integrity and voter fraud has shifted. When my book came out in 2018, they said fraud is like the F word, and people, and the reason why they say voter fraud doesn't happen in high levels is voter fraud as a legal term is highly technical and is a very high threshold for proof. And so
it's hard to prove. Yeah.
But what a lot of regular people would say, well, that's voter fraud, might not legally be voter fraud, but people would say, well, that's absolutely undermining election integrity.
It's cheating. It's cheating.
It's
right.
Cheating.
I mean, you're figuring out ways to, maybe you're not technically breaking a law, but you're skewing it. It's think about a football game, right? You have a referee who is making some really bad calls that favor one team. And people are saying, oh, the guy's rigging it. The guy's rigging it. No, he just made a few bad calls. As those accumulate, it can make a big difference. And that seems to be what's going on with voter polls.
Well, and if you have issues where you have, let's call it a less equitable staffing ratio, and then you have the same thing happen this year that happened 4 years ago when in Atlanta, in Detroit, in Philadelphia, and in Milwaukee, you have infusions of ballots overnight that literally flipped the way those states were leaning.
Yep.
Then I think that's a different context that people want to view this through a more skeptical eye. So that's one of the things, right? The staffing ratios in these precincts is one of them. The other one remains voter roll issues. We always talk about this because they continue to be a problem in states that are poised to matter. Michigan, we're seeing the number of counties, this is one of our election report findings, the number of counties with rates at over 100% registration was at just one, and we're now seeing 53 counties in Michigan with more than 100% registration, which obviously means there's some names on there that don't belong there. Now, I will say this. These issues, this is not always the fault of the people who administer these elections. So I spoke to somebody once who was registered to vote in like maybe 3 different states. And it's because they own property and they moved.
Sure.
And, it's technically the voter's responsibility to call up their previous state and their registrar and say, listen, I don't live here anymore, so please take me off the voter roll.
But people don't do that.
People don't do that. And one time I asked the guy, I was like, how come you didn't do that? And it's a conservative. He goes, because it's not the government's business. Which I thought was great.
I kind of relate to that.
But the problem with that is that when you're registered to vote in more than one state, people absolutely cast ballots in more than one state. The whole book that I wrote in 2018 came about because of a report we did that focused on voter rolls, and we found over 2,000 instances of double voting in Florida in 2016 alone. So
these are people that voted in one state and they voted in the state of Florida.
Absolutely. And again, you say, well, what's the big deal? But when you see elections, I mean, a presidential election this century was swung by 537 votes in Florida. So we expect to see more close races, especially look at Pennsylvania, North Carolina.
Yep.
I mean, this stuff matters. So when you have states like Michigan with voter roll bloat like they have, it's worth noting.
But it's only in Michigan, right? It's not other states. Illinois, counties in Illinois have been so negligent in their efforts that 19 counties in the states failed to remove a single registration on account of a voter's death, because nobody ever dies in Illinois.
So here's the best part about this. So 19 counties didn't remove anybody, including Cook County in Chicago. You may have heard this. Chicago has a bit of a murder problem. So,
but they're not registered voters.
No, there was
apparently
literally 1,000 people that were killed during this reporting period that were not removed from the rolls.
Right.
And again, it's like historically, everyone kind of acknowledges with a smirk that JFK stole the 1960 election from Richard Nixon because of dead people voted in Chicago.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So, and here's the thing. It's about people not being removed from the voter rolls because they're dead, because they moved. It's also a problem because of non-citizens that are on these voter rolls. And if you look at some of the states that have purged their voter rolls, so we talked about Illinois and Michigan, and we're going to talk about Wisconsin here, but what's interesting is that some states have purged, and the numbers are kind of shocking. When you look at who was removed, in the state of Nevada, for example, right, 102,267 voters were removed from the voter rolls because they were deemed ineligible to vote.
Say that one more time. Over 100,000 registrations removed.
Yeah, this is not the state of California with tens of millions of people. This is Nevada. 102,000 voters were removed because they're ineligible to vote. Of those, 11,000 were non-citizen voters. And of those, 3,900, basically 4,000, had previously voted in an election.
Put another way, of the 100,000 erroneous voter registrations they removed, 4,000 of them were people that they know had already voted.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's amazing. And the problem is, what have we had? We've had this massive influx of illegal migrants into the United States, into certain states, that when they get driver's licenses, they, in a lot of states, are registered to vote.
And this gets back to, you hate to be like the meme of the guy from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia who is pointing at all the little charts and the strings, and he's like, it's all connected. But when you go back to where are they putting the migrants?
Yeah.
And why are they putting them there? I'm going to read you some states. Tell me what these states have in common, Peter Schweizer.
Yeah.
Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
All swing states.
All swing states, all seeing 5-figure influxes of unauthorized migrant populations over the last 4 years.
And what do you mean by 5-figure?
Like from anywhere from 10,000 up to 45,000. Those are very conservative estimates. So 5 figures is in,
and the
like my salary.
Yeah,
so,
and the percentage increase is huge. In Georgia, it's from 2021 to the present, a jump of 401%.
And our research suggests that these are actually quite conservative estimates. So they could be a lot higher than that.
Yeah.
So when you're taking people who become potential illegal voters because they are these migrant refugees that you're moving to these states,
right?
And they're in these states that are politically advantageous, and there's swing states. I mean, this is where the lack of election integrity that the left fights to keep from being enforced, and at the same time, they're funding and sending people who might become illegal voters to exploit these loopholes that already exist in the system. It's another thing that we're flagging.
Yeah, they're pretending that it's not a problem. They don't want the voter rolls purged. We also got notice that in Wisconsin, of course, going to be a very tight state. Polls showed as neck and neck. A lawsuit in Milwaukee that demands the city of Milwaukee send out 33,000 postcards to confirm the addresses of those whom the post office maintains do not live or have not correctly identified where they live. That represents, by the way, 11% of all active voters in the city of Milwaukee.
So again, those could also be people who aren't supposed to be here. They could be non-citizens. I mean, it wrote that the overlap between erroneous voter registrations and potential legal voters is high.
Yeah, exactly. In the state of Wisconsin, by the way, they believe that there are 400,000 addresses out of 3.6 million which don't match the post office information. So erroneous addresses, in other words. So a massive problem that, of course, the left doesn't want to pay attention to, but when you're talking about tight elections, that are absolutely key.
Now, I will say this, is that everyone has this information. So, I think one lesson that both sides learned, but maybe the Republicans learned and might implement, is you hear the phrase, you want to chase ballots, not voters now.
Right.
And that's what they mean. So this is a potential ballot. If we're going to sort of as a country say, well, we're less concerned with the integrity of that ballot, I think that's why you see some news. I think Elon Musk is working with Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA. I think they're chasing ballots in maybe Wisconsin as well as Pennsylvania. So, I mean, these are loopholes that become exploited, which I don't think is something to celebrate. Ideally, you'd want elections to be accurate representations of our democratic choices,
right?
Not just who can play by the rigged rules the best, but
that's where we are.
But welcome to 2024.
Yeah, and that brings us to ballot harvesting, which is, again, something that I first learned about in your book, Fraud, in 2018. And this is, terms like granny farming, where they go to nursing homes, right? And they procure ballots and they take stacks of ballots. And in state of Florida, for example, that's illegal. You can't engage in ballot harvesting.
And there's reasons for that. There's reasons for it to be illegal.
Yeah, because there have been problems with this.
Yeah, so in Connecticut, Bridgeport, Connecticut, I guess they had this mayoral election, and a guy was seeking his 8th 4-year term in office. And he defeated his main opponent by a margin of 251 votes. Now, you think an 8-term mayor, he's obviously got to be pretty popular. Well, that could be true. Or it could be because he's quite good at taking advantage of certain loopholes. His challenger was able to appeal the results because he found closed-circuit television footage of 2 election workers stuffing ballots into absentee drop boxes. It was found that no more than 420 people had submitted ballots at these drop boxes, which credit to them for paying attention to who's supposed to be submitting ballots at these drop boxes. But they found over 1,200 ballots in there. I mean, in 2020, we did an analysis. The state of Georgia, our answer to COVID was, okay, we'll have drop boxes that anybody can come by and put ballots in. And we saw that they put these drop boxes in areas that disproportionately favored
Democrats.
Biden. Yeah, absolutely. So we know this is a tool by which political operatives use to try to tilt things. Obviously, that was an example of a fraudulent election. It's a local election. They redid it. But, I mean, the reality is, that's a major way we cast ballots for president in 2020. I think a lot of states have worked to take those away in 2024, but not everywhere.
Yeah, and the point is if it can happen at the mayoral level in Connecticut, it can certainly happen at the state level in some of these swing states. And you can have a federal sort of effort. A major campaign can engage in this through, various organizations to collect these ballots. So, again, these things are dismissed by the left, but people go to jail for them. That we've showed that it's been scaled and it's scalable. There's simply no excuse why this stuff shouldn't be more aggressively policed. And again, to the credit of Connecticut, they actually monitored how many people put in the ballots and found out that, of course, people were delivering lots of other ballots besides their own.
So the last one we'll talk about today, at least the last specific...
This shocked me, by the way.
Why did it shock you?
Because voting in jail, I mean, if you're in jail, you're worried about getting shivved, right? You're worried about lots of things. You're not worried about voting. And I kind of always assumed, especially felons, felons didn't vote. They're not allowed to vote. But that has changed, and there's now apparently a concerted effort to put, I can't believe I'm saying this, voting boxes in prisons. Is this true?
I just love when you create these scenarios for this podcast. Like, you assume the mentality of a character, and you're kind of performing the character for the podcast audience. This is one of the reasons why the podcast is growing so much. But you're like, we just saw.
Because I have a lot of prison experience.
What you guys the character from The Office. We just saw Prison Pete. Prison Pete. Like, no, you go to prison. You're worried about getting shivved. No, you're not. You're worried about being an informed voter, Peter Schweizer, and that's what these people are looking at, because that's what the prisoners they care about. And ironically, no joking, with this the presidential order that they kind of weaponize each of the federal agencies in an effort to get out the vote. One of the biggest pushbacks was you had U.S. Marshals saying, look, we have stuff we're trying to do, but we can't do it because we got to figure out how to let prisoners in Mississippi vote now.
Yeah.
And by the way, we think that might not be great because some of these people might not be able to vote, but we're over here trying to set up voting systems. But I too was also quite surprised at how much access certain prisoners have to democracy. Virginia just passed a bill allowing any registered voter who is confined while awaiting trial or having been convicted of a misdemeanor, he can vote by absentee ballot. States like Alabama and Alaska allow any convict currently imprisoned for a misdemeanor or a felony that does not reach what they call the threshold of moral turpitude to vote.
What is that level? Is that like a violent crime?
I feel like moral turpitude might be different in Alabama than in Alaska. But that's just because I have family, those places.
Right.
In Maine, they don't give a damn about your moral turpitude. You can do anything you want. Imprisonment or conviction never affects the ability to vote.
Yeah.
So
the Washington Post said democracy dies in darkness. Where it does not die is in prison.
democracy is thriving behind bars.
It's thriving behind prisons. And of course, part of the Biden initiative, which we've talked about before, which is to activate the federal government to register voters, there is an actual effort by the Bureau of Prisons, which runs federal prisons, to make sure that prisoners, felons have access to ballots, have a secure place to vote, et cetera. So you might get shivved, but you can vote for your congressional representative and for president of the United States.
Here's the cruel irony. Think about this. I actually believe in the accuracy and sanctity of the votes cast in prison far more than I do. I'm serious.
More
than
confidence.
The ones cast in Detroit or Alabama. You got prison guards monitoring the election there. In Detroit, you got volunteers or.
Yeah, and if you're in a prison of 1,200 prisoners, you can't have 1,600 people vote. In Detroit, you can.
Absolutely.
Right? You could have, because you've got 120% of the population that's actually registered to vote.
And you got a bunch of mall Santas counting them. That's how we do elections in this country.
Well, we're going to keep watching this, and of course, and we would encourage you to check out our elections risk report, which highlights this and a whole host of other problems. I think there's 50 that we have identified that are part of this problem. And again, each one of these may not seem like a lot by themselves. Are prisoners going to sort of swing the election? It's doubtful. But in accumulation with several other actions in a close election could make a huge difference.
No, absolutely. I think it's definitely worth watching. I think if nothing else, what you want to do is you want to have the conversation on the front end. Just the fact that we can have the conversation, because to be honest, one of the things I thought was most disappointing on the heels of 2020 is a lot of, I think, significant issues were raised. But then because of COVID and the internet and the censorship that took place, they just shut down the discussion and they said, okay, no, we can't question the results of it. This has been the most secure and accurate election in American history. And then January 6th happened, and now anybody that was raising questions about election integrity was somehow treasonous, and the FBI wanted to talk to you. So the fact that we have gotten to the point now where you can raise questions, I think, on the front end is in some ways a tribute to our strength as a free society. Let's hope our elections remain free and fair.
Yeah, and let's remember, they try to pick the extreme examples, sort of the Venezuelan hacking of the election. They use that to try to dismiss all concerns about election integrity. The fact of the matter, these are real, they're legitimate. People have been prosecuted from them. They're very, very active. We're going to keep monitoring that, and of course, Eric's going to be point on that because he's been working in this space for quite a while. So we appreciate you, as always, taking the time to spend with us to hear what we have to say and what we've researched on this. You can pick up Eric's book, Fraud. I would encourage you to do so. It's available on Amazon. You can also go to thedrilldown.com to look at information about our research. And of course, you can subscribe to this podcast. Please do that wherever fine podcasts are located. Until next time, thanks a lot.